The puppy had followed the widow for nearly 3 miles, yet never came closer than 6 feet. At 7:10 on a cold Sunday morning in Fairmont, Pennsylvania, Claire Dawson stepped through the stone cemetery gate carrying a bundle of white daisies and the quiet weight of another week without her husband. The German Shepherd pup appeared beside the low wall as she turned toward town. 5 months old, perhaps. Sable black and tan coat. One ear standing, the other still soft at the tip. A worn brown leather collar hung loosely around his neck. Claire noticed him at the first corner. She stopped. The puppy stopped. She took 3 steps. He followed, keeping the same careful distance. "Go home," she said. His amber eyes stayed on her. Claire crossed Maple Street and turned toward the bakery, hoping the smell of bread or the morning traffic would distract him. The puppy changed direction with her. When she entered the shop, he sat outside the glass door, paused together, watching through the fogged window. Mrs. Keller behind the counter looked past Claire's shoulder. "You have company." "I do not." Claire bought a loaf of rye and waited 5 minutes. The puppy remained. He did not scratch the door. He did not bark. He simply waited as though someone had told him patience was part of the journey. Claire left through the side entrance. By the time she reached the next block, soft nails clicked behind her again. 6 feet. Always 6 feet. Her house stood near St. Matthew's Church, a narrow white place with green shutters and a porch Michael had planned to repaint before he became ill. Claire opened the gate and stepped through. The puppy stopped outside. "This is not your house," she told him. He sat. Claire closed the gate and walked to the porch. When she looked back, he was still there, head slightly lowered, rain-dark nose pointed toward her. She carried the flowers inside and placed them in a jar beside Michael's photograph. The kitchen smelled of coffee and cinnamon. 2 mugs stood on the table, one full, one untouched. Claire had stopped questioning the habit. Some promises became rituals long after the person who made them was gone. She returned to the front window. The puppy had not moved. He was no longer looking at the house. He was looking toward the empty chair inside the kitchen. Claire opened the door. "You cannot stay there all morning." The puppy rose, but did not approach. Instead, he lowered his head and worked something loose from beneath his collar. A small metal tag dropped onto the walkway with a faint click. Then he backed away and sat. Claire stepped through the gate and bent to pick it up. The tag was scratched, cold, and heavier than it looked. On one side, beneath years of wear, were 4 engraved words. "For Claire Dawson." Her breath stopped. She turned the tag over. The back carried a faded military unit symbol and a line almost hidden beneath the scratches. "Bring him home." Claire looked at the puppy. He watched her with the stillness of an animal waiting for recognition, not permission. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. Church bells began ringing across Fairmont, slow and low in the cold air. The puppy rose and walked toward the cemetery road. After 10 yards, he stopped and looked back. Claire remained beside the gate, the tag pressed into her palm. Michael's name had not been engraved on it, yet she knew the shape of the letters. He had carved names into metal during long evenings at the workbench, always pressing too hard on the final stroke. The last word carried that same uneven line. "Home." The puppy took another few steps and looked back again. Claire closed her fingers around the tag. For 3 years, she had waited for a promise that could no longer arrive. Now something small, muddy, and determined stood in the road, asking her to follow. She left the gate open and walked after him. This time, the puppy did not stay 6 feet behind. He moved ahead, leading her back toward the stone cemetery entrance and the grave she had just left. The puppy led Claire through the stone gate and along the narrow path between rows of headstones silvered by the morning cold. He moved with purpose, stopping at each turn until she caught up, then continuing toward the older section beneath the maple trees. Claire held the metal tag tightly enough for its edges to press into her palm. The church bells faded behind them. In their place came the soft sound of paws on gravel and leaves moving across stone. "You know where you are going?" she said. The puppy glanced back once. He stopped at Michael Dawson's grave. Claire's steps slowed. Fresh daisies rested against the marker where she had placed them less than an hour earlier. The puppy approached the stone, smelled the grass at its base, then sat with one paw touching the edge. Claire felt the air leave her chest. "No," she whispered. "That is not possible." The puppy looked at her, then lowered his nose toward the tag in her hand. Before Claire could move, footsteps sounded behind them. A man in a weathered olive field jacket had entered the cemetery carrying a small paper cup and a folded American flag pin in his palm. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with short dark hair and gray-blue eyes that seemed tired before he saw the dog. Then he stopped. "Where did you find that collar?" he asked. Claire turned. She knew him before she remembered his name. Luke Bennett, one of Michael's Marines. He had stood near the back at the memorial service 3 years earlier, remained only a few minutes, and disappeared before Claire could speak to him. "The puppy found me," she said. Luke approached slowly. The dog did not retreat. Instead, he rose and watched Luke with quiet attention. Claire opened her hand and showed him the tag. Luke's face changed when he saw the unit symbol. He set down the coffee and knelt. "May I?" Claire handed it to him. He traced the worn engraving with his thumb. "For Claire Dawson. Bring him home." Luke closed his eyes for a moment. "Michael made this." Claire searched his face. "You are certain?" "He engraved everything himself. Dog tags, toolboxes, coffee mugs if you left one near him long enough." A faint memory of Michael bent over his basement workbench moved through her. The lamp, the metal shavings, the way he always pressed too hard at the end of a word. Luke turned the tag toward the light. Beneath the unit mark was a 4-digit number Claire had not noticed. "This is not a serial number," he said. "It is a lock code." The puppy stepped closer and touched Luke's wrist with his nose. Luke looked down at the oversized collar. Recognition flickered across his face. "I have seen this before." Claire's voice tightened. "On this dog?" "No. In Michael's pack." Luke sat back on his heels. "Years ago, he carried a brown leather collar during every training trip. I asked him why. He said someday it would lead a dog to the right door." Claire looked toward Michael's name carved in granite. "He never told me. He did not tell me enough either." The words carried more weight than Luke intended. Claire heard it. So did the silence that followed. The puppy moved between them and sat, one side touching Claire's coat, the other near Luke's knee. Claire noticed how tired he looked beneath the calm. "Why did you never come to the house?" she asked. Luke stared at the tag. "Because Michael came home to you in a flag, and I came home walking." Claire did not answer immediately. Wind moved through the maples, sending a few dry leaves across the grave. The puppy watched both of them as though waiting for something unfinished to continue. Luke examined the collar and found a narrow line of double stitching beneath the buckle. "There is something inside," he said. He did not cut it open. He stood and handed the tag back to Claire. "We need a veterinarian. Someone who can check the puppy and open this without damaging whatever Michael hid." Claire looked toward the cemetery gate. "I already tried telling him to go home." Luke picked up his coffee. "Maybe he has been trying to show us where home is." The puppy rose at the sound of the word. He walked toward the path, stopped, and looked back at them. Claire slipped the tag into her coat pocket. Luke fell into step beside her. For the first time, the puppy did not follow 6 feet behind. He walked between them. Dr. Rachel Morgan's clinic sat 2 blocks from the town square, tucked between a pharmacy and an insurance office with a faded blue awning. By the time Claire, Luke, and the puppy arrived, the waiting room smelled of clean tile, cedar disinfectant, and wet wool coats. The puppy paused at the threshold, looked back at both of them, and entered only after Claire stepped forward. Rachel met them near the examination room. She was in her early 40s, with dark hair tied behind her head and the calm voice of someone accustomed to frightened animals and anxious people. "Let us start with the simple things," she said. The puppy climbed onto the rubber-topped table without resistance. Rachel checked his eyes, ears, paws, and heartbeat. He was underweight, but healthy. No signs of neglect. No fresh injuries. "About 5 months old," she said. "Male. German Shepherd. Strong for his age." Claire stood near the table, one hand resting against the edge. "Does he have a chip?" Rachel passed a scanner slowly over his shoulders. The device gave a soft beep. She checked the number on the screen, then tried the regional database. Her expression tightened. "There is a record, but the owner information is incomplete. The registered location is a training center outside Fairmont." Luke looked at her. "Which center?" Rachel turned the monitor slightly. "Liberty Ridge, Canine Program." Luke became still. Claire noticed. "You know it." "Michael volunteered there," he said, "after he left active duty." The puppy lifted his head at Michael's name. Rachel saw the reaction. "He knows that sound." Luke moved closer. "Or he has heard it enough times." Rachel examined the old brown collar. The leather had softened with age, but the stitching beneath the buckle was newer than the rest. She pointed to the narrow seam. This was opened and sewn shut again. Claire removed the metal tag from her pocket and placed it on the counter. Rachel read the engraving, then looked between them. "You said your husband made this?" "Luke is certain." Rachel gathered a small seam tool and asked Claire to steady the puppy. Claire placed one hand beneath his chin. He looked directly at her, breathing evenly. Luke stood on the other side, close enough for the puppy's shoulder to touch his sleeve. Rachel cut only the newer thread. Inside the collar was a thin waterproof sleeve, folded twice. She eased it free and set it beneath the examination light. Luke's hands tightened at his sides. Claire did not move. Rachel opened the sleeve. A small photograph slid onto the counter. 3 figures stood in front of a wooden kennel building. Michael Dawson, younger and smiling. Luke in a gray sweatshirt, and a female German shepherd with a white patch beneath her chin. On the back, written in Michael's hand, were 2 words: "Liberty waits." Beneath them was an address and a date from 3 years earlier. The puppy smelled the photograph and gave one soft whine. Luke touched the image of the dog. "That is Liberty," he said. Michael talked about her constantly. Said she could calm a room without making a sound. Claire stared at her husband's face. "He never mentioned her to me." Luke looked toward the floor. He said he was waiting until everything was certain. He wanted to bring her home after the program approved the placement. Rachel returned to the computer and entered the chip number again, this time using the code from the tag. A second file appeared. "Here," she said. The puppy's registered name was Scout. His mother was listed as Liberty. The emergency contact line carried no telephone number, only initials. MD. A note beneath it read, "Hold for Dawson transfer." Claire pressed one hand against the counter. "Transfer to whom?" Rachel scrolled farther. The final line had been entered 6 months earlier. "Program closed. Contact Daniel Price." Luke recognized the name. He trained dogs with Michael. Rachel wrote down the address from the file. It matched the one behind the photograph. The center is about 12 miles west. Scout stepped down from the table before anyone invited him. He walked to the clinic door, sat, and looked back at them. Claire held the photograph. Luke held the tag. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Claire looked at Luke. "If Michael planned this, I want to know why." Luke nodded. "So do I." Rachel placed a temporary lead on Scout and handed it to Claire. The puppy did not pull toward the exit. He waited until Luke joined them. Outside, the morning had warmed enough to soften the frost along the sidewalk. Scout moved ahead, then slowed until he was once again walking between them. The road to Liberty Ridge narrowed beyond Fairmont, leaving storefronts behind for open fields, bare maples, and low hills washed in winter light. Claire drove while Luke sat beside her with Michael's photograph resting between his hands. Scout occupied the back seat, alert but quiet. His temporary lead looped through the seat belt. Every few miles, he lifted his nose toward the cracked window and breathed in the cold air. The address led them to a wooden sign leaning beside a gravel lane. Most of the paint had peeled away, but the carved outline of a German shepherd remained visible beneath the words Liberty Ridge Canine Program. Beyond it stood 3 kennel buildings, an empty training field, and a small office with boarded windows. Claire slowed. "This place has been closed for months." Scout began to whine. Not loudly, just one steady sound in the back of his throat. The moment Claire opened the door, he jumped down and pulled toward the nearest building. Luke took the lead. "Easy. We are following." Scout crossed the yard without hesitation, passing 2 empty runs and stopping at a weathered wooden kennel near the far fence. A faded brass plate on the gate read Liberty. He sat beneath it and looked at Claire. She held the photograph beside the name. The female shepherd in Michael's picture had once stood in this exact place. "He brought her here," Claire said. Luke nodded. "More than once." A truck door closed behind them. An older man in a canvas jacket approached from the office, carrying a ring of keys and a thermos. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, and his gaze went first to Scout, then to the collar. "I was wondering when he would finish the trip," he said. Claire turned. "You are Daniel Price?" "I am." He stopped several feet away and lowered one hand. Scout approached, smelled his fingers, then returned to Claire's side. Daniel smiled faintly. "That tells me he found the right person." Luke stepped forward. "You knew Michael Dawson." Daniel studied him for a moment. "You are Bennett." Luke's shoulders tightened. "He spoke about you too." Daniel unlocked the office and led them inside. Dust lay over the desks, but one corner had been kept clean. A small metal lockbox sat on a shelf beneath framed photographs of veterans and dogs. Daniel pointed to the 4-number keypad. Claire removed the tag and read the code beneath the unit symbol. The lock opened on the first try. Inside were a sealed letter, a folded wool scarf, Scout's training card, and a second collar sized for a younger dog. Claire touched the scarf. It was deep blue, worn soft at the edges. "This was mine," she said. "Michael packed it by mistake before his last trip." Daniel shook his head. "Not by mistake." He explained that Michael had brought the scarf to the center 3 years earlier, asking the trainers to preserve Claire's scent and introduce it to Liberty. His plan had been simple. Once the placement was approved, Liberty would come home to Claire. But Michael died before the paperwork was completed. Claire looked toward Scout, who had settled beside her chair with his nose near the scarf. "Then why him?" Daniel opened the training card. Liberty had remained at the center and later delivered a litter. Scout was the calmest of the puppies, the one who repeatedly chose Claire's scarf from a line of scent cloths. Michael's instructions had been kept in the file, but the program lost funding, changed ownership, and finally closed. Daniel had planned to bring Scout to Claire himself. "Last night, I placed the old collar on him and packed the lockbox," he said. "I was supposed to drive to your house this morning." Luke looked at Scout, but he left first. Daniel nodded. The kennel latch was open at dawn. He followed the scent trail from the scarf, then the cemetery route we had trained from photographs and walking maps. Claire held the blue wool to her chest. "He was trained to find me." "Yes," Daniel said. "But that is only half the instruction." He handed Luke the training card. Beneath Scout's name, Michael had written one line in block letters. "Find Claire. Bring Bennett home." Luke stopped breathing for a moment. Claire turned toward him. The words on the metal tag changed inside the silence. "Bring him home" had never referred only to the puppy. Daniel placed the sealed letter on the desk between them. Michael knew Scout might reach Claire, he said. He also knew the dog would lead her to the one man who kept standing too far away. Scout rose and moved between Claire and Luke, touching each of them with one shoulder. Outside, wind passed over the empty training field. Inside, Claire rested her hand on the unopened letter while Luke stared at the sentence Michael had left for him 3 years earlier. Claire did not open the letter at Liberty Ridge. She placed it inside her coat and drove back to Fairmont with Scout lying across the rear seat, his nose resting on the blue scarf. Luke sat beside her in silence, the training card folded in his hand. The words "Find Claire. Bring Bennett home" followed them through every mile. By the time they reached Claire's house, afternoon light had turned the porch windows gold. Scout stepped through the gate without hesitation, crossed the kitchen, and settled beside Michael's empty chair. Claire removed the second coffee mug from the table and placed the sealed letter where it had stood. Luke remained near the doorway. "You can leave if you want," she said. He looked at Scout. "That is what I have been doing." Claire pulled out the chair across from her. Luke sat. The kitchen clock ticked above the sink. Scout rested between them, one paw touching Luke's boot. Claire broke the seal. Michael's handwriting filled 3 pages. She began reading aloud. "Claire, if this reaches you, then a dog has done what I could not." The room seemed to tighten around the words. Michael wrote that Liberty had helped him through the hardest months after leaving active duty. She had given his mornings shape, his evenings calm, and his fears somewhere gentle to settle. He wanted Claire to know that bringing a shepherd home had never been a casual promise. It was his plan for the life they were still supposed to have. Then the letter turned toward Luke. "Bennett will stay away," Michael had written. "He will tell himself it is respect. It is guilt. Do not let him confuse the two." Luke lowered his head. Claire continued. Michael wrote that Luke had carried more men home than anyone would ever know, yet believed surviving made him less worthy of a place among the families of those who did not. He asked Claire not to forgive Luke because there was nothing to forgive. He asked her to open the door when Luke finally stood outside it. Claire stopped reading. "You knew he thought this?" Luke asked. "No," his voice was rough. "He knew everything I tried not to say." Scout lifted his head at the sound. Claire returned to the letter. "The dog is not my replacement," Michael had written. "He is the promise I did not get to keep. And if he brings Luke with him, then he has completed 2 journeys." Claire's eyes blurred, but she kept reading until the final line. "Home is not where grief ends. It is where someone is still willing to set a place for you." The kitchen fell quiet. Luke covered his face with one hand. For 3 years, he had imagined Claire blaming him for returning when Michael did not. He had used that fear to avoid the house, the cemetery, and every memory that asked him to stay. "I should have come sooner," he said. Claire folded the letter carefully. "Yes." Luke looked up, surprised by her honesty. She continued, "But you are here now." Scout stood, took the temporary lead in his mouth, and carried it to Luke. He placed it across Luke's knee, then sat. Claire almost smiled. "He appears to have another instruction." Luke picked up the lead. "I think he has had enough instructions for one day." Scout waited. Claire rose, opened the back door, and reached for Michael's old walking coat hanging beside the frame. She had not worn it since his final winter. Outside, the air smelled of cold grass and chimney smoke. Luke stepped onto the porch. Scout moved between them, no longer trailing behind. They walked toward the church road without speaking. At the corner, Claire realized she had left the second coffee mug on the table. She did not turn back for it. Scout trotted ahead 3 steps, then slowed until they were beside him again. For the first time in years, the path away from the house did not feel like leaving someone behind. It felt like making room for those who had finally found their way back. The days that followed changed Claire's house by inches. A water bowl appeared beside Michael's chair. A folded blanket took the place of the second coffee mug. Scout learned the sound of the back door, the location of the food bin, and the exact hour sunlight reached the kitchen floor. He still slept near the empty chair at night, but each morning he moved a little closer to Claire's bedroom door. Luke began stopping by after work. At first, he came with reasons. The gate hinge needed tightening. The porch step had loosened. The fence along the alley leaned toward the neighbor's yard. Claire never told him those repairs could have waited. Scout followed Luke from one task to another, carrying a glove, a rag, or the end of a measuring tape as if supervising the work. When Luke finished, he always wiped his hands, looked toward the road, and said he should be going. Scout answered by placing the leash at his feet. The first time, Luke laughed. The second time, he stayed for coffee. By the third Sunday, Claire had stopped asking whether he wanted a cup. She simply set one beside him. The house no longer felt arranged around an absence. It felt lived in again. Scout's nails clicked across the hallway. Luke's tools rested near the porch. Claire opened windows she had kept closed through 3 winters. One afternoon, Daniel Price brought the remaining paperwork from Liberty Ridge. Scout's adoption had been delayed because the program closed before the transfer was completed. Claire signed every page at the kitchen table. Luke stood beside the window while Scout slept beneath Michael's coat. Daniel checked the final signature and smiled. "He has been home longer than the paperwork admits." Claire touched the old collar. "Will he keep this?" "If you want him to." Luke turned the metal tag over. "For Claire Dawson. Bring him home." The words had carried 2 meanings from the beginning. Claire fastened a new identification tag beside the old one, but left Michael's engraving untouched. Daniel also brought news about Liberty. She had been adopted by a retired teacher in Ohio and was doing well. Claire studied the photograph he handed her. Liberty stood on a porch beneath a red maple. Older now, but still carrying the same calm expression from Michael's picture. Scout smelled the photograph, then rested his chin on Claire's knee. "Your mother found her place too," she whispered. That evening, Luke remained after sunset. Rain moved lightly against the kitchen windows. Claire heated soup, and Scout lay between their chairs. Luke told her stories about Michael that had never reached the family letters. How he carried packets of hot chocolate during winter exercises. How he repaired everyone's broken gear with silver tape. How he once spent an entire night beside a frightened young Marine who could not stop shaking after a storm, saying nothing until the man was ready to speak. Claire listened without correcting the past or asking why Luke had waited so long to share it. When the bowls were empty, Luke looked toward the door. Scout raised his head. Luke sighed. "I know." He did not stand. The rain continued. Claire poured more coffee. For the first time, silence at the table belonged to 3 living beings and did not feel like grief. Weeks later, Luke finished rebuilding the gate. He sanded the wood, replaced the rusted latch, and painted it deep green to match the shutters. Claire watched from the porch while Scout sat beside him. When the paint dried, Luke opened the gate and called the puppy through. Scout crossed once, turned around, and returned to Claire. Then he carried the leash to Luke. "He wants both of us," Claire said. Luke looked at the road leading toward the cemetery. Then we walked together. They left the house beneath a pale evening sky. Claire on one side, Luke on the other, Scout between them, the old tag tapping gently against the new one with every step. At the stone gate, he paused but did not pull toward Michael's grave. He looked back at Claire, then at Luke, waiting until both were beside him. Only then did he continue. Luke understood what Michael had meant. Home was not a place one person could be ordered into. It was a path someone had to choose, one step at a time, beside those still willing to walk with him. At Michael's grave, Scout stopped only long enough to smell the damp grass and touch his nose to the stone. Then he turned back toward Claire and Luke. He did not sit. He did not wait. He simply stood between them, looking toward the cemetery gate as if the visit had already said what needed to be said. Claire rested one hand on the puppy's back. Luke placed the other near the old collar. The two metal tags touched with a soft click. "He is ready to go," Claire said. Luke looked at Michael's name carved into the stone. Maybe he was never asking us to stay here. They walked home beneath a sky turning blue-gray with evening. Scout moved evenly between them, no longer 6 feet behind, no longer rushing ahead. The following week, Daniel called with an idea. Liberty Ridge had closed, but its records, training materials, and several unused kennels remained. A nonprofit in the next county wanted to reopen part of the property as a placement center for veterans and surviving families. They needed volunteers who understood both the dogs and the people receiving them. Daniel asked Claire first. She thought of Michael's letter, the blue scarf, and the promise that had taken 3 years to reach her door. "I can help with the families," she said. Then Daniel asked Luke. Luke's first answer rose automatically. "I am not the right person." Scout was lying beneath the kitchen table when the call came. At the sound of Luke's hesitation, he stood, crossed the room, and placed the leash across Luke's boot. Claire watched without smiling. She did not need to. Luke picked up the leash. "Tell me what you need." They began on Saturdays. Claire met with spouses, parents, and widows who were uncertain whether bringing a dog home would feel like replacing someone they had lost. She never offered easy answers. She showed them Scout's 2 tags and said, nothing was replaced. Something was continued. Luke worked with veterans who stood outside the training field and claimed they were only there to observe. He recognized the distance in their posture, the way they kept one hand near a pocket and one eye on the nearest exit. He did not push them. He repaired gates, carried food bags, and let Scout do the introductions. The puppy had grown taller, his soft ear finally upright, but he still approached people the same way he had followed Claire. Slowly, patiently, never closer than they allowed. One Saturday, a former Marine named Aaron Mills arrived with his sister. Aaron had stopped answering calls and rarely left his apartment. He stood beside the fence while a young black and tan shepherd named Daisy watched from the training yard. Daniel opened the gate, but Aaron did not move. Scout walked to him, sat 6 feet away, and waited. Aaron looked at Luke. "What is he doing?" Luke leaned against the fence. "Giving you room." Aaron stared at Scout for a long time. Then he stepped forward. Scout rose and moved 1 step closer. Daisy followed from inside the yard. No one spoke. The distance closed slowly, measured not in commands but in trust. By the end of the afternoon, Aaron sat on the grass with Daisy's head resting across his knee. Claire stood near the office window, holding Michael's blue scarf around her shoulders. Luke came beside her. "He would have liked this," she said. Luke watched Scout lying near Aaron's boots. He planned more than we understood. The program remained small. 3 dogs. For families. A handful of volunteers. Yet each placement changed the rooms people returned to at night. A food bowl appeared beside an empty chair. A leash hung near a coat that had not moved in months. Morning walks replaced hours spent staring through windows. Claire began keeping only 1 coffee mug on the table, not because she loved Michael less, but because the second place was no longer reserved for absence. Luke came every Sunday. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they drank coffee while Scout slept between them. One evening, Luke found Michael's old photograph newly framed beside the picture of Scout and Liberty. Claire had added another photograph beneath them. It showed Claire, Luke, and Scout standing at the reopened training field. "You put me on the wall," Luke said. Claire adjusted the frame. "You came home." Scout lifted his head at the word. Then he rose, brought the leash to both of them, and waited by the open door. By early autumn, the reopened training center no longer looked abandoned. Fresh paint covered the office trim. New gravel filled the path between the kennels. A wooden sign near the entrance carried the name Liberty Ridge Companion Program, and beneath it hung a smaller plaque with Michael Dawson's initials. Claire arrived each Saturday before 8, carrying coffee, forms, and the blue scarf folded over one arm. Luke came with tools in the back of his truck, though fewer things needed fixing now. Scout greeted both of them at the gate, taller than before, his sable coat dark along the spine, and both ears fully upright. He no longer wore the oversized collar loosely. The leather fit him now, and the old tag rested beside the newer identification tag with a soft metallic sound whenever he moved. The program grew carefully. No crowds. No promises made too quickly. Daniel evaluated each dog. Rachel handled health checks. Claire met with families in the office and listened to the questions people were often ashamed to ask. What if the dog reminds me too much of who I lost? What if I cannot love it enough? What if I fail again? Claire never answered with advice alone. She told them about the second coffee mug, the empty chair, and the puppy who had waited 6 feet away until she chose to follow. Luke worked outside with veterans who preferred movement to conversation. He taught them how to measure fencing, repair latches, and walk a dog without tightening the leash every time fear rose. Scout moved among them, choosing the quietest person and settling nearby. One Saturday, Aaron returned with Daisy for their 30-day check. He looked different, not transformed, just rested. His sister said he had begun answering the phone and walking 3 miles every morning. Daisy stayed close to his left side, her pace matching his. Aaron handed Luke a photograph of the two of them beside a lake. I almost did not come here, he said. Luke looked at Scout resting near the office steps. Most of us almost do not. Aaron nodded. What made you stay? Luke turned the old collar tag between his fingers. A dog with instructions. Later that afternoon, Claire found Luke alone in the training yard, watching Scout and Daisy move through the grass. Michael gave Scout a mission, she said. Luke kept his eyes on the dogs. He gave all of us one. Claire stood beside him. Wind moved through the maples, lifting the edge of her scarf. Do you still feel like you came home in his place? Luke took time before answering. Sometimes. Claire nodded. And now? He looked toward the office where families were filling out placement forms, where Daniel was laughing with Evan beside a stack of donated blankets, where Scout waited at the gate for the next person to arrive. Now I think he left me work to do. Claire did not call it healing. The word would have been too clean for something built from grief, guilt, coffee, wet paws, and repeated choices. She only said, then stay. Luke looked at her. No one had spoken that word to him as a command. Not for years. Scout crossed the yard carrying a leash in his mouth and placed it between them. Claire laughed softly. Luke took one end. She took the other. They walked the perimeter with Scout between them as evening settled over Liberty Ridge. At the far fence, they passed the old kennel bearing Liberty's name. Claire stopped and touched the faded brass plate. Michael thought a dog would come home to us, she said. He was right, Luke answered. Scout leaned against both of their legs. The next morning, Claire changed the kitchen again. She moved Michael's chair closer to the window instead of keeping it fixed at the table. She placed Scout's water bowl beside the back door and set 2 coffee mugs down when Luke arrived. This time, both were filled. Luke noticed but said nothing. He sat in Michael's chair only after Claire nodded. Scout lay across the space between them, head on Luke's boot, tail near Claire's foot. Sunlight reached the floorboards and warmed the old collar tag. For years, Claire had believed moving anything would mean losing Michael twice. Now she understood that memory did not depend on keeping a room unchanged. It lived in what people continued. Outside, the gate stood open. Inside, the second cup did not grow cold. 6 months after Scout first appeared beyond the cemetery wall, winter returned quietly to Fairmont. Frost silvered the stone gate, and the bare maple branches clicked together above the path. Claire walked with Luke on one side and Scout on the other, the blue scarf wrapped around her shoulders. The German shepherd had grown into his legs. His sable coat was fuller now, his amber eyes steady, and the 2 tags on his collar touched with each step. One carried his name and Claire's address. The other still read for Claire Dawson on the front and Bring Him Home on the back. They reached Michael's grave shortly after sunrise. Claire placed white daisies beside the stone. Luke stood closer than he had on any previous visit. He no longer remained several rows away or found reasons to leave before the silence settled. Scout smelled the grass, pressed his nose briefly to the lower edge of the marker, and turned toward them. He did not sit down to wait. Instead, he carried the leash to Luke, then returned to Claire and touched her hand with his nose. "He has somewhere else in mind," Claire said. Luke looked through the open gate toward the road. "He usually does." They followed Scout back through the cemetery and drove west to Liberty Ridge. The training center was already awake. Daniel opened the kennels while Rachel checked a newly arrived shepherd mix. Aaron walked Daisy along the fence, moving slowly beside a young veteran named Caleb Turner who had come only to observe. Caleb stood with his hands deep in his coat pockets and kept insisting that he was not ready for a dog. No one argued. Scout approached and stopped 6 feet away. He sat. Caleb looked down at him. "Why does he keep doing that?" Luke stood beside the gate. "Because 6 feet is close enough to say I am here and far enough to let you decide." Caleb remained still. Scout waited. The morning passed in small movements. One step, a pause, a hand lowered. By noon, Caleb sat on a bench with the shepherd mix resting beneath it. Claire watched from the office doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Luke. "Michael would have noticed him," she said. Luke looked toward Caleb. "Michael noticed everyone. So do you." Luke shook his head. "Scout does most of the work." Claire smiled. "That sounds like something Michael would have said." Near the front desk, the old lockbox from Liberty Ridge rested beneath a framed photograph. Inside were copies of Michael's letter, Scout's training card, and the blue scarf that had carried Claire's scent through 3 years of waiting. Visitors often asked why the program displayed such ordinary things. Daniel always answered the same way. Because ordinary things are what lead people home. That afternoon, the program completed its 10th placement. There was no ceremony. A woman signed the final page. A retired Marine clipped a green leash to a calm older dog. Scout stood between them until both were ready to leave. Claire wrote the date in the program ledger. Luke closed the kennel gate and checked the latch twice. When the work was finished, they returned to Claire's house beneath a sky turning pale gold. 2 coffee mugs waited on the kitchen table. Scout drank from the bowl near the back door, then carried his leash into the living room and placed it beside Michael's old chair. Luke sat there now without waiting for permission. Claire took the chair across from him. Scout lay between them, his head resting across Luke's boot and one paw touching Claire's shoe. The old tag caught the last sunlight through the window. "Bring him home." For months, Luke had believed the words referred to a single journey. A puppy finding a widow. A Marine returning to the family he had avoided. But home had become larger than that. It was a reopened training field. A second cup that no longer cooled untouched. A gate repaired and left open. A person given 6 feet of space and enough time to choose the next step. Later, they walked to the porch as the church bells marked the evening hour. Scout moved ahead to the green gate, then turned and waited. Claire stood on his left. Luke stood on his right. Together, they stepped onto the sidewalk. Scout did not follow behind them. He walked between them, the old and new tags sounding softly against each other. Behind them, one porch light glowed. Ahead, the road curved toward the cemetery and Liberty Ridge beyond it. No one spoke. They no longer needed to explain where they were going. The promise had found its door, and this time, everyone it carried was walking home.